and then joining us for the panel discussion, which will be after the viewing of the video. I want to begin by doing a Native American land acknowledgement. The tribe that the land that we are most of us are on, if you're in the Tacoma area, are on is the indigenous land of the Puyallup tribe. I want to begin by acknowledging with humility that this is their land and has been for time immemorial. And I'm speaking to you today from the traditional territory of the Puyallup people. Puyallup means generous and welcoming people. They are a Coast Salish tribe. They were forcibly relocated to reservation lands in what is today Tacoma in the late 1854, after signing the Treaty of Medicine Creek. Today, they have an enrolled population of 4,000, of whom 2,500 live on the reservation.
Well, good evening, and welcome to the final workshop of our series on Native American justice. And this is brought to you by the Conversation Around Race Committee and Associated Ministries. Tonight, we will be viewing the documentary Dawnland, which chronicles the work of the first government-sanctioned Truth and Reconciliation Commission in the US, which took place in the state of Maine and investigates the impact of Maine's child welfare practices on Native American communities. I am Aya Hashiguchi Clark, and I am a member of Trinity Presbyterian Church in Tacoma. The Conversations Around Race Committee, which was formed over a dozen years ago, is a consortium of 4 Tacoma area faith communities who have partnered together with the goal of deepening our understanding of race and racism, and how, as people of faith, we are to respond to the needs that we see in our city. Currently, there are 4 faith communities that meet together for conversations around race. They include the Church of the Indian Fellowship, Peace Lutheran Church, Tacoma Friends Meeting, and Trinity Presbyterian Church. We have ministered together throughout the years with pulpit exchanges, theatrical presentations with post-play discussions, and with workshops such as the one tonight. And many thanks go to Ted Johnstone, who has chaired our committee for many years, and to Associated Ministries and Sandy Windley, whose assistance and support has been invaluable to us. Thank you. So, some housekeeping items before we start. As with our previous workshop, this Zoom presentation will be recorded, so please be aware of that. Much of tonight's presentation will be our viewing of the documentary, which will utilize the screen sharing option and will be shown full screen by our Zoom host. After the viewing of Dawnland, there will be a panel discussion where you might want to switch your Zoom screen to speaker view, which will make the panel's presentation easier to view. And during the documentary presentation, please put yourself on mute so that ambient noise from your own background won't interfere with the viewing of Dawnland. And if you need to make a comment or ask a question, feel free to use the chat feature here on Zoom. Now it is my honor to introduce, or shall I say reintroduce, our presenter for tonight. That's the Reverend Irvin Porter. Reverend Porter has served at the Church of the Indian Fellowship, which sits on Puyallup tribal land here in Tacoma, where he has been the pastor for over 20 years. The Church of the Indian Fellowship was founded in 1876 as a mission to the Puyallup people by the Presbyterian Church. Reverend Porter is the first Native American to pastor this congregation. And for the past 8 years, he has also served the wider Presbyterian denomination as the Associate for Native American and Intercultural Support, where he serves as the liaison for the 95 Native American congregations within the Presbyterian Church USA. Reverend Porter has been an invaluable member of the Conversation Around Race Committee and we are so pleased and appreciative of his contributions to tonight's event.
There's sadness, anger, and shame at hearing this information, sometimes hearing it for the first time. This evening, we've assembled some folks who are going to help us through some of this information. And then we will also offer a time for questions and answers. And we want to acknowledge those who are with us this evening. Reverend Fern Cloud, Sisseton Wapaton, Dakota, pastor at Pujuta Zizi Presbyterian Church in Granite Falls, Minnesota. She is the moderator of the Native American Consulting Committee and a member of the Native American Coordinating Council of the Presbyterian Church USA. Thank you, Fern, for joining us. We also have Anthony Trujillo, Okay Owinge Pueblo. Hope I said that right. He's a PhD graduate student, Harvard University, and he is treasurer of the Native American Consulting Committee and a member of the Native American Coordinating Council, Presbyterian Church USA. Thank you for joining us, Anthony. We have Danielle Mckinney, Dakota. He is a minister of the Presbyterian Church USA and a retention officer at Haskell Indian Nations University in Lawrence, Kansas. Thank you, Danielle, for joining us tonight. Is Vance on here? Anybody see that? I'd like to ask each of our panelists to briefly reflect for us your thoughts on the film Dawnland, if you've seen it before or how many times you've seen it, and share with us at this time. And I'm going to ask Fern to start us. You are muted. There you go.
Hamadaki. Hello, my relatives. I greet you all with a good heart and a warm handshake. This has been a very troubling video to watch, although, you know, it isn't something that happened in many years ago. It's still going on today. You know, I worked in Rapid City, South Dakota in the school system, and I think South Dakota has the 90% of the children are placed in white families that are taken from foster care, even though, you know, the ICWA was, you know, in 1978 passed. You know, it's like we never win. You know, it was a win, but in actuality, more than 30 states do not abide by ICWA. So, you know, or they make it they just ignore it, which is really, you know, one of the tragedies that families face when they're, you know, trying to get their children back. You know, when I was in Rapid City, South Dakota, this was going on, and we were really advocates for a lot of children because I worked in schools and I had many children, families that children that I work with that were taken away from their family from, you know, the court said neglect. And, you know, some of the, you know, there was no really anything that they could substantiate as in court that they were neglected children. It's just maybe one incident. And so, you know, it was so troubling for us So, we became advocates and tried to work with the Department of Social Services and with these families. And we came to find out while we were working with within the courts that the state of South Dakota got $79,000 per year for every year that these children stayed in the system. So, you're looking at, hundreds of children in the system at $79,000 per child per year. And so this is what really, we were fighting against. The state and the Department of Social Services there were, working together, to get this money. And so it wasn't about, the care or welfare of the children. It was became a monetary issue that was not only good for the, Department of Social Services, but also many of the foster families, which they got, they they got so much money for these children. And so, as a student support teacher in the schools, I, was at a lot of meetings, and I sadly to find out that a lot of these children were given pharmaceuticals that were intended for adults, not children, and so they were medicated, so that they could take care of the, not be such trouble. So, there was so many atrocities that we encountered and uncovered dealing with foster children. So, working with there's a project called Lakota People's Law Project that is still working today. And nothing has changed. Very little has changed. Because fighting a system that is sanctioned by the U.S. government and and the state, and so it's been really troubling, and it still is today. So we're looking at this video here of Dawnland. It's nothing new for us. It's still going on. Our children, the cultural genocide. It's true. It is devastating for our tribes. These children are being kidnapped. That's just all there is to it, because the court systems, they all work together to remove these children. So, it's very troubling. And Cheryl Spider Dakota is from my tribe. And I remember that that case, and how, our tribe, Sister Wapton, Sioux tribe really, fought hard with Senator Aberesk, back in that day, to support the ICWA, Indian Child Welfare Act. South Dakota is a very racist state, but what's alarming is I'm in Minnesota, and the statistics for Native children being placed in non-Native homes is even more disheartening and troubling. So, I thank you, Irv, for inviting me on this panel. It's something that, we advocate for our children and for our tribal nations. So I'll just quit here and listen to Sandy, a White Hawk that was in there, in that video, is also a good friend of mine, and we did a lot of ceremonies together for healing ceremonies for children that were adopted or in foster care, coming back to the tribal, their tribal relatives and communities. So it's really it's been a good video. All right, I'll let you go, and I'll let Anthony or someone else take the stage here.
Thank you, Fern. Anthony, if you could share also reflection on the film as we've seen it, and if you've seen it before.
Sure. Well, first of all, can you hear me okay? Okay, good. Well, thank you for the invitation to join everyone for the showing of this film, this really powerful film this evening. I'm on the East Coast, and which is the Dawnland, or close to the Dawnland, I should say, in Connecticut, at least where I'm currently. And I saw this film first a couple years ago at its premiere, when some of the members, including Sandy Whitehawk, were discussing the process of being involved in this Truth and Reconciliation project. You know, one thing that strikes me, so I'm from New Mexico. Grew up in Oquewinga Pueblo, northern New Mexico, just north of Santa Fe, in between Santa Fe and Taos. But I've lived out here on the East Coast for about 10 years now. And my area of study is in like the early colonial era. And so, you know, this film largely is situated in the 20th century, and it's just surprising, or maybe not so surprising, but striking that these, you know, the things that I study in the colonial era, you know, 1600s, 1500s, are still so present and today. So, you know, this film focuses largely on the relationship between Native tribes and state agencies, the federal government, the state of Maine in this case as well. But that has deep, deep precedent. I mean, that's the recent story. The deeper story is the relationship between Native tribes and churches. Out here in the Northeast, that would be Congregational and Presbyterians. Down in the Southwest where I'm from, it's the Catholic Church largely until the mid-19th century. And then also up in the Northwest, where I've also lived. I went to Seattle Pacific University. And just thinking about, you know, each of these different regions have their own unique histories, but so much of that is tied up with, as Irv mentioned, the seizure of Native lands, the erasure of Native people and cultures. And it just, I guess the question that, you know, really, that I think about every time the times that I've seen this film, or, you know, what's the root of that? Why is the state so interested in basically a genocidal practice? You know, getting rid of indigenous people and presence and culture, both and, you know, and land, and seizing indigenous land. And what is the root of that within Christian theology, and you know, and the faith traditions that many who are joining this evening are connected to. So like that's a question that I you know, mull over a lot. The relationship between just trying to evacuate indigenous presence, at the same time trying to just, you know, re-educate indigenous people in colonial forms, you know, through a really, I guess, distorted version of what I would consider Christianity to be. So yeah, I guess it's always a challenge to watch this film, and to see, you know, you would wish and hope that things would change over centuries, but also to see how much stays the same, and to also kind of connect this. I think there's an element of this, especially in the earlier in the colonial eras, where it's not just about, you know, identity. It's about enslavement. Indigenous people were the first people enslaved in North America, whether we're talking about in the Caribbean, in the Northeast, in the Southwest. Indigenous people, it's the slavery that is often not recognized and not discussed, and kind of a part of that is put in the context of Indigenous children being removed from families, removed from communities, placed in Christian families, being used as basically slave labor on homesteads, in haciendas. And so that's really it was through the enslavement of Indigenous people that it became such a deep-rooted practice. And it was when Indigenous people, were, well, maybe these are thoughts that just come to my mind as I think about this long and deep history with the removal of children from families and communities, and these re-education campaigns that continue to this day. So those are a few of my thoughts. It also just strikes me, and I'll conclude on this, that truth and reconciliation in this particular form, in this film, in a way reverses the practice of the Christian confessional tradition or practice, which is having people who have been perpetrators or committed sin, interrogate and investigate themselves in their own lives, their own communities. In this case, it's kind of fascinating to me that Indigenous people are those who are the ones who are telling our stories for good reason and important reason, for healing within Indigenous communities and Indigenous people. But it strikes me that, I wonder what would it look like for churches to really dig into their own history, to say, how did we come to have this building on this piece of land in this territory, this Indigenous place? What kinds of programs has the church been involved in that has removed children from families and caused these fractures within Indigenous communities? So those are just some of the thoughts. I realize I'm kind of just riffing here, but thank you so much.
Thank you, Anthony. Danielle, any questions?
Good evening, everyone. My name is Danielle Mckinney. I want to thank Irvin and the group for inviting me to come and be a part of this tonight. I have not seen that movie before, but I resonated a lot with the things that were said. I experienced a lot of those things firsthand. I am affected by ICWA and what it was meant to be and how it just doesn't quite, meet what we need. I really liked the idea of the restorative justice. It's been a really big push. I think that one of the things that we've really been looking at in terms of understanding the church's role or anyone's role in truth and reconciliation, it is a lot of work, just like what they were talking about. But I think it's, the more we learn, the more it's easier for us to be able to recognize that the more we can prepare folks for what their role might be. That's what I've learned when I was watching this, is that's a lot of the things that we learned was, basically making the mistakes we were making. But I am really encouraged. I mean, yeah, things are very much the same, but I think we're at a point where people are starting to recognize some of these issues. I mean, to even be able to acknowledge the fact that Indigenous people are 100% affected by residential schools, by education in America, and across the border there up in Canada. We were all affected by education, based on what began as a treaty right, but ultimately became a cultural genocide. And, all this time, Native people thought that they were getting their right, when really we're starting to see now that it really wasn't a right. It was something completely different. And to be able to recognize that we have to identify our miscommunication, not just on the indigenous side, but on other people's understanding of what that meant. The whole concept of killing the Indian and saving the man, it may not always, people may not say that that's what's happening, but it still kind of is happening. But I see a lot of our young people now. I work with a lot of college students who are coming forward now with their eyes more open about what's happening. I think that we're starting to find a group of people who are becoming more and more confident in understanding that there's a path to healing, and it may not always look the same, but I think everybody's committed to that. And it's unfortunate that there are times when it may seem like the people that are allies to us may sometimes feel like they are the perpetrators. But it's hard work. It's important work. I know, like in working with the young people I work with, a lot of times people see me as an enemy. And it's not until later on that they start to realize that, hey, you were trying to help me. It doesn't happen right away, but that's part of that healing process, is that going through that difficult walk with people, knowing that they may see me as an enemy, but later on recognizing that, hey, you really just have my best interest at heart. And it's hard for us to see it, and we may not see it right away. It may even take years, it may take a couple of generations for us to see it. But I think that's the path that we're moving, and I think it's good work. So those are my thoughts on that. I could go on and on about more, but those are the main things that I see, and wanted to be able to share that. Thank you.
Yeah. For our panelists, apologies need to come with meaning. We hear that a lot. Church denominations are apologizing for their treatment of Native American people in the past. I know that the Presbyterian Church ran 31 boarding schools from the 1880s until the late 1970s. But they are just the beginning of reconciliation, reconciling any relationship. How important are these apologies, and are they useful? Farn?
Oh yeah, that's that's kind of a sore subject for me. Apologies without reparations, or reconciliation without, really, they're just words most of the time. Of course, there are a lot of well-meaning people who are really sorry, and so those people become our allies, and in the work that we're doing. So, I guess that's one good thing that can come out of reconciliation and apologies, that it's building, it's out of the, masses of people who hear the truth and reconciliation issues, become allies. And yes, it is, Danielle, you're certainly right. It is tough work. I've been in, this has been my ministry before I came to the Presbyterian, in Rapid City, and I worked, with the schools, and I worked with the many of unmarried women, sexual assault and domestic violence. And many times, as I talked with them and helped them heal, many times it goes back to boarding schools, and the younger children, it's foster care. So it's their parents who are healing from the boarding school many times, or grandparents, and then the children, many children are healing from foster care. It's, the stories that I hear, heard, are just, heart wrenching. And, it just, the resilience of youth, that's all I can say, sometimes, and the grace of God, for those children. So, apologies are good in the way that it helps those who haven't heard about these and the work we're doing with the state and the federal government, and supporting the tribal. There's another, if you have a paper and pencil or can remember, there's another video. It was made by the Lakota People's Law Project. It's called Hearts on the Ground. So, if you have a chance to view that, it's also good. So hopefully I kind of answered your question, Irv. Thank you.
Thank you, Fern. Anthony?
Yeah, that's a really fascinating question. I mean, an important question. Part of what I wrestle with is I'm going to situate this again within a Christian notion of forgiveness and confession, or confession and forgiveness. What does that do, and who is it for? So I guess what I'm thinking about here is, like, in one way of thinking about, I guess, thinking about sin, or thinking about wrongs that that we have been are implicated in, is that it causes a fundamental paradigm shift in how we think of the world, how we think of history, and how we think about how we orient ourselves in relation to each other. It's not simply like oh my gosh, I realized I did something wrong, and now, like, that kind of, like, by saying that, I've addressed the issue, and now I can kind of get on with my life just the way that I've always known my life or imagined my life should unfold. I think for the idea of maybe conviction in a Christian framing is the idea of, like, a deep assessment of one's life, and, like, what is the path that I have been walking on? What are the stories I've told myself that have brought me here to make these types of decisions, to relate with people in these kinds of ways, and in this case with Indigenous people. And now that I'm having a reckoning with that, it's not just saying I'm sorry, but it's actually rethinking all of American history. It's rethinking, what does it mean to be on this land? What does it mean to have the privileges or the rights that I enjoy? What has been, we are coming out of a day of Memorial Day, memorializing, recognizing the veterans. Who has had to sacrifice so that we could have the lives that we have now, today? That is Indigenous people. That's a lot of people of color whose lives have given, who aren't recognized on a day like Memorial Day, who don't have days, that are honored in that type of way for the lives, for the ways that our lives and our lands have, been used to build the Presbyterian Church in the USA, or any other number of denominations. So that's really what I'm thinking about, is not apology in a way that, like, I say I'm sorry and I can then go back to my life, I'm thinking about a reckoning that fundamentally changes how we live and act in the world.
Thank you, Anthony. Danielle?
Well, again, I agree with the two people who spoke before me. We actually witnessed an apology to an Indigenous congregation once, and that was really unsettling. So when we went back to where our home was in Lawrence, we had been working with the local Presbyterian church there, and they were primarily non-native people, and they were really working on understanding what it meant to do the land acknowledgements, to understand the plight of the Native Americans. At that time, water protectors was big, and they really wanted to learn a lot of things. And so what we did one time was we had an exercise within the church, and we divided the group into 3 different groups. And one of them was the first group got to be for Native American for a day. So they got to write down the things that they believed that were important to Native Americans. The second group was the group from the 1860s. And they were instructed to take a Bible and to hand it over to the Native Americans. And then the third group was the church of today. And they were supposed to apologize for what the first group did. And the first group had to write down some of the things that they did, and that they believed that the old church did to Native Americans. And we took the list, and they had to stick that list inside that Bible, and they gave it to the Native American people. And then we told the third group to apologize for what the old church did. And right away, they were really frustrated. They said, well, can we see the list? And we said, no, you can't. And they were like, why not? And I said, because you never knew what they were. And it was very frustrating for them to have to apologize for something they didn't even know what was on the list. And then to recognize that, that there was such a disconnect. And we found how that was not a helpful thing to apologize for something they had no idea what happened. And so, we showed how the apology, it really doesn't hold a lot of water. And so we asked them all to think about the things that were important to them and how we might be able to identify commonalities, to try to help people find restorative kind of light or restorative life back into all the things that they had lost. And we discussed about ways in which we can help them find those things that once had meaning that were lost, but now can bring back again. It was a really powerful conversation, but it was really a mind-opening experience for us too, to be able to say that, we have to go beyond the words of sorry. We have to do this hard work of recognizing and listening. It's not about what we lost, it's about what we can have back. And that's really what reparations are about. It's about sometimes elders have to give the young people permission to be able to take their spot in Indigenous culture. And sometimes older Indigenous folk, they need to have that permission to be able to say, it's okay if you pray in your language. It's okay if you smudge, because so many times we were taught growing up that was not okay. And there's so many benefits from that. And we have to not just think about ourselves, but we have to think about the generations ahead of us. How can they find that healing? Because if we're getting healed, they're getting healed. And those things that we see in the movie, yeah, that happened to our grandparents, that happened to our parents, but we're affected too. We live it too. And if we can live with trauma, we can live with resilience. And that's exactly what we want for our children. And so that's pretty much what I have to say about that. But just wanting to make sure that we have to go far beyond just saying, I'm sorry. Thank you.
Thank you all very much. We're going to open this time for you now to ask questions of our panel this evening. And so if you would use the raise your hand function, or you can raise your hand if you want to. Then I will call on you, and we'll, unless you have someone specific, one of our three panelists that you want to address the question to, I'll throw it out there for all three of them. Aisha.
Do the panelists feel like watching Dawnland would be useful for a couple young attorneys? I know that when I questioned them about ICWA, they were saying that yes, indeed, they do have, they work as young attorneys for the Child Protective Services in 2 counties, one in Washington State and one in California. Is there any way that that might change the heart of these young attorneys?
I'll throw that out to any three of you who'd like to comment.
I'll just jump in to say, oh, go ahead, Danielle.
I was just gonna say, go ahead. I'll go after you all.
I mean, I was, as many people as can see this film, I would say yes, that's wonderful. I think it frames the issues. It shows just the effects that they're having within Native communities to this day. And I think anybody who works in this, in this sphere should absolutely be well versed in this type. And I would even suspect that these young attorneys, unless have some familiarity in general with it, even if they don't understand the specifics of how it's been implemented in different places.
Okay, I guess I'll go next. I really do think that it would be helpful for young attorneys to watch the video. One of the other things that I have done in the past is help not just lawyers, but judges and teachers and other people who work with Indigenous people, is to, I wish I could come up with this little thing that says 10 things that every teacher needs to know, 10 things every healthcare worker needs to know, 10 things every lawyer or judge needs to know about working with Native American people. And you can see a little bit in that video, but I think people need to recognize that you can't just have 1 or 2 meetings and connect with somebody just like that. You have to understand that this person could take a long, long, long time. We had a church that wanted to come and do what do you call it, like a VBS, and then they wanted to do work service projects. And we told them, they said, we're really not interested in working with you unless you come for a minimum of 5 years. And I said, and part of that is, if you want to get close to our community, you have to really get to know them, and you're not going to get to know them in 1 year. You got to take the time to come and be there every time and start to learn how we are able to trust. I've talked to teachers before that said, I send letters home to these students and to their parents and nobody responds. And I told them, they're waiting for you to move on and waiting for the next teacher to come. I said, you got to stay there at least, 2 or 3 years before they start realizing that you're in it for the long haul. you know, and it takes a lot of time to build that. The other thing is that, you know, they'll give you clues. A lot of times people will say, well, I've been working with people and I don't even know if they trust me. I don't even know if they like me. I don't even know if they want to talk to me. And it's like they give you clues. You know, for when I was teaching, how I knew students trusted me was right before they went to lunch. They would say, can I leave my pencil here? This is my favorite pencil. Can I leave my purse here? Can I leave my jacket here? Because that was a clue that I knew that they trusted me. And a lot of times people don't know that. They don't know that there's clues that people can trust them. There are other clues that are out there. And there are times when people, non-Indigenous people, will say something with the best intentions, but it may come off as an offense, as an offensive statement. And so, so you have to be able to know how to navigate your way through that, because there are miscommunications. I have it all the time with my boss, and my boss, he's Indigenous, but he didn't grow up Indigenous. And so we really struggle with that communication process. And, but it's good work. It's very important. And we can trust each other, and students trust them too. If you are visible and people see you, especially older people and younger people, if they look at you and they see you and they value you because you reach out to them, that news travels fast. There's a lot of nonverbal clues that you give off that people don't, you know, they're watching. As little kids, we learn to watch, and we don't even have to say a word, and we can know everything about you before it even happens. And so, so those are some of the clues that I wish we could help people understand a little bit more and help them kind of navigate through that a little bit more. I think it would make this work a lot easier if we had that opportunity to try to help people understand that little language barrier that we have. Thanks.
Thank you, Dana. Vern?
Can you repeat the question? Sorry.
Somebody who was wondering if some young lawyers that she knew would benefit from watching this video, and kind of how. What do you think about that?
Yeah, that's, you know, talking about allies, you know, it's the fight is in the legal arena with foster care. It definitely is with the local Department of Social Services, the state, the county, and the tribe, of course. But yeah, lawyers, young lawyers, I think would be a real asset to this, you know, going forward. Local, I mean, in every community, you know, where there's Native people, with this tribe, where there's, you know, this taking, you know, children away and putting them in, and when there are families, relatives there, and they overlook that. And that's the biggest part that I think that is troubling, is when there are families, extended families who would take the children, they overlook that. And or either that they just put, you know, outrageous, you know, duties that they have to go, you know, perform, like going to parenting classes. I mean, really, or some, you know, it's just, it's always one, you know, roadblock in front of the other. And I think having legal help would really, you know, be an asset to some of these families who are fighting to get their children back. Thank you.
The lady in the video said that there was a comment that the apple doesn't fall too far from the tree. So giving Native children to the grandmother or whatever, they just figured it wasn't going to help. And then Danielle, one of the things that you said about the trust issue happened to me here in Tacoma. I came to this church, and as you heard, I was the first Native American in 124 years to serve as the pastor of this congregation. And all that time, there was no Native leadership ever in this church. And many of the first ministers were assigned by mission boards. And when I got here, we had very few that came, a lot of the elders from the session, their families and all that. And I had set up for Sunday school before worship. And a lot of times it was just me and my wife there for Sunday school. And so I was meeting with a mentor of mine, and I was telling him about this. About 9 months in, this was what was going on. And I said, I don't understand, I'm here doing what they want me to do and all these things, and nobody seems to be coming. And he told me, he said, your job is not to get people into that church. Your job is to do what God has called you to do in that particular place and do it to the best of your ability. And what I also found out from a friend of, she's a friend of mine now. Back then she was, and still is, the Puyallup Tribal culture director. And I met with her and we talked and we had a good visit and everything. And she had been a Christian in her upbringing, but was no longer a Christian. She was observing the tribe's local religion and all of that. And so she told me, I told her about this one time, maybe 3 or 4 years later, when all things changed. And she just kind of smiled at me. She said, because they didn't think you were going to stay. And I said, what? And she said, they were waiting to see how long you were going to stay at that church. And if you didn't have people coming to Sunday school, and if you didn't have more people coming to worship, then that would prove their point. And you would pick up and leave and take your marbles and go home. And she said they were waiting to see how long you would stay. And so in 2004, I've been here for 3 years. In 2004, it just took off. People finally reckoned in the community that I was for real, that I was here for the long haul. A lot of lessons in that. And I'm Native American, but I was not raised on a reservation. I'm an urban Indian. So I came, there was that too, that people knew that I wasn't raised on a reservation. So, oh, it's this guy, he's got all this white training. What's he going to tell us? So that happened to me. And when you said that, Danielle, I was just like, oh my God, that happened exactly to me. Does somebody else have a question they'd like to pose? Christy.
Thank you. And thank you all for being here and for having this movie for us tonight. And this has been really illuminating. And as I was watching it, I mean, I remember at the end when one of the women said, of course this happened in Maine, and the light in Maine, and there being the people of the morning, people of the dawn. And I was wondering, where do you see any hope that this is moving into other states and that other places may be doing the same truth and reconciliation work, and that the ICWA Child and Welfare Act has some hope of being what its name kind of promises? I mean, it sounds like such a positive thing, and it has not been a positive thing. And I don't know, I mean, a little progress has been made, it sounds like, but it's still far from what its, I won't say what its intent was, because I feel like we understand what its intent was. It was named a certain thing that sounded like good medicine, but it ended up not being. I'm making a long question out of a short one. Where is there hope? Where should we pay attention now? And where is there energy now around similar efforts that are happening throughout the country? As imperfect as their process was in Maine, I think it provides some kind of template, maybe. And I didn't really hear much about like where else this is going in the movie.
Thank you, Christy. Anthony?
Did you just call on me?
Yes.
I'll jump in. Yes. So I think I'll First of all, I'm really grateful that there's several panelists, because I think it's just great to hear Fern and Danielle and Irv, your different perspectives on these questions. But I will kind of expand this out a bit to think more broadly about tribal sovereignty and tribal integrity. So sovereignty, the Indian Child Welfare Act is one aspect, one dimension of keeping tribes integrated, like culturally, language, land. This has to do with children and being able to continue these practices. And so, I kind of want to think about this broadly, because I think within federal Indian law, it's working on many fronts. Whether it's through the preservation and protection of sacred sites, to resources, tribal resources like up in Alaska. So I'm thinking about the larger framework of how the Indian Child Welfare Act, is really about making sure that the tribal nations can, sustain themselves, have their culture, their lands, their resources, their people, and in the Northwest, one of the things that I think is much more apparent, when we think about the child welfare kind of tends to be a hidden thing. Like, this happens at social work level. Some people may know about it, but it's often not very apparent. What tribes get, I think, tagged with a lot in the Northwest is salmon and casinos. And there's a lot of people who get really frustrated and upset about, about these two specific things, especially, in many parts of the country, but especially up in the Pacific Northwest. So I guess I'm trying to think about this question largely about, legal protections of treaty rights, of law, of existing law. So this being one of them, and those are under challenge from so many directions by people who just don't understand that either one, the history behind these, why do tribes have all this access to, priority fishing, for example, or gaming? Why is that the thing that tribes are focusing on? Can't we put children in quote unquote better homes? All of these things have to do with with tribal sovereignty and the integrity of tribal communities. So, and there's a lot happening on every single one of those fronts, like in each of our own backyards. And I think becoming fluent, or even at least conversant in what those issues are, what the actual real stakes are, what the stereotypes are that kind of fuel the opposition, and also being able to to be an ally with tribal nations that are pushing hard to maintain these protections. Some of them, which are they always just feel like they're hanging by a thread. So I would my encouragement would be to broaden the scope, to keep children and elders squarely in view, because they often get forgotten, but also to keep it in the larger sphere of tribal sovereignty.
Thank you, Anthony.
I think I'll go ahead and go next on this. Along the lines of what Anthony is saying, I totally agree with that. I think one of the things that the movie brings up too is the whole concept of identity. And there are so many things that are happening on a broader scale, helping Indigenous people understand their position on identity. And I think that once we start making shifts in those directions, everything seems to kind of follow very quickly. You know, once people start learning their language, things start opening up for them. There's opportunities that happen to come along. And I see that happening when people start to understand their identity. I think that's going to be a key component in the ICWA, is just recognizing that people can find their identity by knowing that where they come from, and knowing, it's just like what we're going through right now as Indigenous and Presbyterians. We're trying to understand who we are as Indigenous traditional people and Presbyterian Reformed tradition. We're still trying to figure out that identity. And so, we're trying to do that to help the future generations understand that it's not one or the other. Because for 150 years, you have to pick one or the other. But now we're starting to see a blending. And I think once we keep pushing that, and all these different, everybody doing their own part and making sure that we accept all that, things will start moving. The momentum will start going a lot quicker than it was, because my world had opened up once I started learning my language and learning that it was okay for me to learn about my culture. And I just feel like things went so quickly, and the motivation, it just built the momentum. And I see that happening if we can focus on that in this issue as well. Thank you. That's a really good question. Thank you.
Thank you, Danielle.
Yes, I'd like to answer that, Irv. Yeah, it's very interesting. I really want to clarify this. The trouble that the foster care program is having is in the urban areas. Is not happening on the reservations. And I think this is something that Christy was asking about. What do you see going forward? Are there any positive notes in with ICWA? Well, since in the documentary, Cheryl Spider Dakota, prompted the Siston-Wapton Sioux tribe to have its own ICWA office and to really advocate for Native children in foster care. I want to tell you, I was a foster parent when I lived on a reservation. I was born and raised on the Siston-Wapton Sioux tribe, so I'm a tribal person. I've always been in my culture, in my language, and so I really am close to this movement of getting our children back. So yes, most tribes throughout the nation have their own Indian Child Welfare Act office. So those children that are within the bounds of an Indian reservation have that advocate for tribal government. But it's those children, those families who are like in Rapid City, South Dakota, where I work, that's off the reservation. So they are subject to county and state jurisdiction. So that's where the trouble comes in. So I just wanted to clarify that for those listening. It isn't like the tribes are not doing anything, or they are. They've enacted laws. There are many, on the reservation. So our fight is with the non-native jurisdictions with the Indian Child Welfare Act. So, I just wanted to, you to know that. So it kind of clears things up and lets you know that, we are doing something, and we are, even though I've been a pastor here for the last 18 years, I've worked in all these sectors, and I really feel it's part of my ministry to help people, families, and anybody. But it's always been advocating off the reservation. Unfortunately, that's where it seems the breakdown. really happens with non-native jurisdictions. So thank you.
I want to thank Danielle and Fern and Anthony for taking this time to be with us this evening. For all of you who also have taken this time to be with us, and for all of you who have been with us since January, when we started with Doctrine of Discovery, and then in February when we moved on to the Indian boarding school, in March where we worked on the decolonizing the Thanksgiving myth, and then this last workshop showing the Dawnland documentary. Thank you all very much. And do not keep this information to yourself. Please share this with your families, with your friends, with your congregations, because that's why we're doing this. Thank you very much. Good evening. Bye-bye.